We had a really strong El Nino in 97. Is it working?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
And I want to say in the month of September, we had at least tropical storm warning. But I might be wrong, but in any case, this particular spot, myself and two buddies paddled out there. I don't know, maybe there were 5 guys in the water, and it was tropical. Tropical. It was raining, but without the wind, felt like you were in the tropics. And so yeah, my son sends me a video clip at the very same spot Friday morning, and I can't leave my desk. I'm working because I got to finish that letter.
Yeah.
I told everybody to be done by Friday, and here it is Friday. I'm still riveting it apart. So anyhow, it was an interesting week for surfing. It was an interesting week for the markets.
How so?
Just the volatility leading out from the previous Sunday, which was the Monday for Japan, that had the carry trade was quote unquote getting extinguished for the yen, and everybody are covering shorts on the yen. Then every asset class on Monday morning come in the U.S. markets was getting crushed because everybody was selling whatever it was the hell they were using the yen for in the carry trade. So anyhow, it was as volatile week. It's so funny because I don't know how much we've talked about this, but I might have mentioned it before. The reason why I'm so excited about this product, the Forex product, is because I'm exhausted with equities. I'm just sick of them after a quarter of a century of poor executive management decisions. I know that we had to have talked about this. How last year my partner and I got stuffed with 5 reverse splits out of 7 allocations. Just done with it. This very morning, the market has rebounded from last week's lows. It's almost unchanged, or break even from where things were prior to that sell-off due to the carry trade. But meanwhile, the Russell 2000, which is the small cap index, which is the one that I have to focus on because my traditional fund is all in small caps. It's down. It's down 98 bips. It's down 1%. Everything else is up except for the Dow. I'm just tired of it. Tom, I'm so tired of it.
When did you reach the point where you're tired of it?
Well, it was at the end of last summer. It was going into fall of last year when my partner Matt said, I don't know why we're messing with these small caps anymore. We keep getting screwed with poor management. Yeah, I hate to keep falling back on that one, and that's when he wanted to take his portion and jump back into the crypto world, which is the world that he is so adept in. And
when you say poor management in the small caps, is that the personnel?
Yeah,
they just don't have
CEO,
the mental,
CFO,
emotional, physical bandwidth.
CEO, CFO, and in some cases the board of directors. I mean, the thing with small cap companies, quite often executive management might be the management, the original management when it was a privately held company and a startup. Like you might have the actual original CEO, and they're not savvy in the world of capital markets, and they might do inappropriate capital raises, or in the case of what I was complaining about, they might do what are called reverse splits when in reality they don't. There's other alternatives. There's a thing on the NASDAQ and on the NYSE called the minimum bid rule. And to simplify it, if your stock trades below $1 for X amount of months, you'll be issued a notice by NASDAQ or by New York Stock Exchange, depending on where you're listed. And they'll say, look, you're in violation of the minimum bid rule. You have 180 days to get your stock back up above $1, and it has to stay there for 10 days. And there's all kinds of manipulation that goes on in that realm. As soon as that type of news hits the tape, then market makers, they'll take advantage of it. Those are guys that trade, on a principal basis, on the bid and the ask, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, what ends up happening is now it's a tug of war, and if management doesn't have a sense of what some alternatives might be, what they'll do is issue a proxy that says we're going to vote on doing a reverse split, and that's where, they'll do a reverse 1 for 10 shares. What that does is increase the price of the stock automatically. It doesn't increase the valuation of the company. The market cap stays the same. The number of shares outstanding shrinks by the ratio of 1 for 10. And their problem solved, right? But what typically happens is then the stocks get crushed again. Next thing you know, they're trading below $1 again. And there's other ways to avoid doing that. One thing the management team can do is go register a shelf offering. They hire an investment bank like my old shop, Roth Capital, and sign a contract. The easiest way to say it, like we're thinking about doing a capital offering in the not too distant future. It's called a shelf offering, and they'll say we're going to raise $100 million in the next 12 months or 2 years, whatever, and that helps with that minimum bid rule. It'll help a company get an extension because it looks like they're doing something to improve their share price. These are all little, call them tricks. I don't know what to call them because it's legitimate as opposed to.
How more common than not?
Well, I wrote about this in one of my letters. I for the last 7 years I worked at Roth Capital, I worked as a market maker, which means I had a pad that I made a market in a number of stocks. I think my list was something like 250 companies that I made an active market in, where I'm on the bid and the ask, I trade as principal. And computers, software, and all that kind of stuff being what it is today, you don't have to monitor every one of those stocks. You can set up a spread where if your bid and ask will always move within a specific percentage of that inside market. So you don't have to watch everything, but watch every one of your stocks. But the ones that I was active in, you would stay close to the inside because you wanted to broadcast your name so you might get order flow. All right. So that being said, that list of 250 names, give or take, over the span of 7 years, if there was ever a reverse split in any one of these issues, I would know. It's unavoidable because everything shifts, right? The stock price changes, all that kind of stuff. And I think that in those 7 years, I experienced maybe 4 or 5 reverse splits out of that list of 250 plus names. And the amazing thing was, last summer, we had 7 allocations in stocks that were around $1, a little bit more or a little bit less, that might be subject to minimum bid warnings from the NYSE or the NASDAQ. And 5 out of 7 of those stocks did a reverse split. So, that makes that kind of takes the gas out of your tank, the air out of your tires. I was just like, God, am I sick of this? And 3 of those 5, they weren't warranted. One of them, the stock had closed on a Friday at about $1.30, $1.20. And that Friday afternoon, they issued their proxy statement. And on that proxy statement, it said, we're going to vote on doing a reverse split. Well, they didn't even have a minimum bid rule. They weren't even an infraction of anything. Well, that was a Friday afternoon dump, proxy statement news. And by 5 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. local, Pacific, that stock was trading at 85 cents, plain 85. So it lost, 35% of its valuation because of a news headline that hit the tape on a Friday afternoon when everybody's generally gone home for the weekend, right? And so it was just, it was like enough is enough, huh?
How much is that affected? Just even a news flash or speculation?
Well, that's why they call it a Friday afternoon dump, right? They do it in politics as well. If it's negative news,
really, just based on that perception.
Oh yeah, and that stock never came back. And they eventually, the proxy vote was 6 weeks later, maybe 2 months later, and you would never think that the general population would say, yeah, let's do a reverse split. But it got voted in, and by that time we had sold the stock, but it was like, we were up in the stock. We actually we were in the green, as they would say, before that announcement hit. And like that, one decision like that blew up the trade for us. And so it's just, the funny thing is I traded that space for almost 25 years at Roth. I loved it because it's entrepreneurial in spirit. Small caps they're crazy. still a little bit of the Wild West aspect, right? The volatility was fun, and but that's when you're working for a broker dealer, right? It's not in your portfolio. So I just look, it's ran its passion for me, and on top of the fact that I am now 57, while I'm not exactly a baby boomer, I'm Gen X, I still fit that cohort where, you know, you have equities right now trading at all-time highs, or, you know, prior to the disaster of last week. If we're rolling into a recession and the equities market rolls over, which it's bound to do at some point, it's inevitable, the odds of me benefiting from another bull run are limited, because my time frame, my duration is shrinking, and so that's another reason why this adventure with Smart Capital with the Forex is fun. You know, roll out of these damn equities, roll out of the narratives, roll out of the reliance on management, and as we called Forex there, a couple months back, the honest man's market, which still, I know the rest of the gang loves that. It still troubles me a little bit, but.
How so? Why would that trouble you? Trouble you?
Look, whenever I think of a marketplace, I never think of honesty.
Well, you talked a lot about ethics and why it really matters, or ethics matter to you. Why do they matter so much to you, truly? And why does it matter?
The simplest way for me to explain it, I think I mentioned on the podcast that I registered as a libertarian, I believe at the age of 18. And a lot of people don't really understand that political philosophy. If I had to label it more strictly, I'd consider it as close to the founding fathers' principles, you know, back during the American Revolution, right? The way people view it nowadays, it's like you want to legalize marijuana and stuff. That's not the case. The concept of libertarianism is freedom, right? So I'll draw it all the way back to my experience at Roth Capital Partners. I, would have to deal with compliance on a continual basis, especially as a market maker, and they're the ones that make sure that we're not breaking the rules enforced by the system, right? And they used to always. They knew that I was a libertarian, so they thought I was an anarchist, which is not the case, right? But they thought, oh, he's going to break all the rules. And I followed the rules more stringently probably than anybody else on the desk. And my argument always was, and this will answer your ethics question, I don't want you putting rules on me. So what I'm going to do is show you that I can obey your rules, and that's why I don't need them.
Whoa, say that one again.
Well,
I love that.
You don't have to worry about me breaking your rules, because I'm going to show you that I can follow your rules so that you don't need to enforce them on me. And I know that we talked about ethics a bit on the podcast. There's so many schools of ethics. But the bottom line is, ethics is about principles. Ethics is about a general consensus. One thing that I will say is a lot of people confuse law with ethics. And also, I'm not going to say that they don't have anything in common, but laws, some people say laws are written to be broken. No, in my point of view, laws are put in place so you can learn how to get away with what you want to get away with, which is the opposite of what I was saying about me following your rules so I can show you I don't need your rules, right? I've always argued against business regulations, because what business regulation does is set, in some cases, limitations. So a company only has to do so much to follow the guidelines. I know I'm kind of running all over the place now with this stuff, but it's if a government sets limitations, a company is going to do its very minimum to follow those limitations, right? And if you don't have those limitations, but you have a market that's more or less free, and will punish those that break, say, a form of ethics as opposed to rules, the hope is they'll get priced out of the marketplace and they can't maintain their viability, their existence. And of course, a lot of people would say that I'm naive for saying that if companies weren't regulated, that they would perform more ethically. And I would say, well, that's your point of view, and you're a pessimist. And I say, everybody always says libertarians are pessimists. No, we're optimists. We have faith in you. We have faith that you're going to do the right thing. You don't have to be slapped on the wrist. So, but now I'm going way downstream, because I think that I also shared with you, my 4+ years of sobriety. All my idealism is washed ashore, for lack of a better way to say it. And I love, it's pragmatism with a capital P means a lot more sense to me now. There are bad actors and there are good actors, and the good actors always end up paying for the bad actors, and that'll never go away. But
go back to that you said freedom. Mm-hmm. What's your take on, this might be a bit of a right turn, but freedom and liberty, and how are they different or the same? Freedom and liberty.
Okay, liberty is the lack of constraints from a hierarchy. All right. So that would be more political in nature, organizational in nature, societal in nature. To me, freedom is an individual thing, and freedom is a form of whatever you perceive your freedom to be. I think I told you that, I had a spiritual shakedown there 4.5 years ago, and that process required me to surrender my self-will to something higher than myself. And some people would call that surrender subjugation. What I consider that surrender to be is 100% pure freedom. And since I've realized that I'm not the center of the universe, all of a sudden I have a sense of freedom that I never imagined. And again, that came from the concept of surrender and surrendering my self-will. And what that does is it means if I realize there's something bigger than myself, I know I'm allowed to make mistakes, number one. I also know that I don't need to come up with the answers. And which means expectations go out the window, acceptance rolls into where expectations used to be, and I get to enjoy life. And that's freedom. And
you answered that question.
And all that stuff in my life came out of nowhere. I wasn't expecting it.
Speaking about unexpecting it, but happy, for lack of a better word, that you did experience it without planning for it or aiming for it.
That's the beauty of it, right? All of a sudden, I realized if I let go, surrender, release, I don't know what's coming. And if I don't know what's coming, I don't need expectations. And God, if you're not expecting good and it happens, right on. If you're not expecting bad and it happens, you don't recognize that it's bad. Right? We have good things that happen. The way things work, good things happen to us and bad things happen to us, but that's all perception, right? Now, if I have expectations, it's easy to define good and it's easy to define bad. If I don't have expectations, what happens to me happens to me. And it's if I perceive it as a negative, it's good. That's my fault, or I don't want to say my fault, but now I don't even remember what your question was.
It's about the contrast or similarity of freedom and liberty.
Oh yeah, that was
in your personal life and then professional life.
That's so hard to answer in the professional realm because it depends on the institution you go to. That goes back to what we were talking about, executive management, way back there when we were on the Little Island. There's management teams that have an entrepreneurial aspect to them, or I should say, they're not significant in hierarchy, and they want to let people inside the institution thrive, right? And it's hard to find an environment like that, but that's also understandable because it's hard to find people to fill those seats in that environment. So that's why I would roll that all the way back to what I was talking about on a personal basis between liberty and freedom. You know, I could go back to my old firm now, which was a great place to work with and to begin with. I mean, there was certainly a entrepreneurial aspect to it. You know, find a way to bring more order flow on the desk. But the way that I've restructured my life, some of the things that drove me nuts there, which would drive anybody nuts anywhere, right? In any institution they work in, we always have our druthers. I'd probably be able to deal with them a lot easier, I'm sure. But don't need to bring the past forward. That's behind us.
How much is fear a factor in your experience from the executive's decision? Really, in any factor.
There's no way I could answer that because I've never had direct access to the executives except for in the firm that I worked for. I'll tell you this much: the guy that I worked for at Roth Capital, Byron, I didn't recognize any fear in him. He was always trying to stay ahead of the curve, always trying to find the next niche, and you know, in a crazy way, he was ahead of everybody in the firm. You know, it was easy for us to follow his lead, to benefit from his drive, and I would consider that. I don't want to say that he was a high risk taker or that he lacked fear, but and I certainly would not want to speak for him. But some of the other discussions, some of the discussion we were having back there when I was talking about executive management of these publicly traded companies, oh my God. That's the interesting thing about being a publicly traded company. You're under the spotlight more significantly. You have to file far more financial statements and talk about freedom and liberty. You know, somebody running a publicly traded company certainly loses freedom and liberty as opposed to somebody running a private entity.
How so?
Public company, executives have a lot more to answer to. Shareholders, SEC, FINRA. You know, the shareholders, the regulatory bodies, and you know, some of the shareholders are extremely sophisticated. You get hedge funds, and you might get an activist hedge fund, like a Dan Lowe from Third Point, who I covered when he first opened his doors and was not an activist investor. But you get guys like him, and all of a sudden they're all over the executive management teams, wondering why the CEO has a private jet and all that kind of stuff. If you're a private company, nobody's going through those perks, benefits. It's a little bit harder for them to go through your financial statements. In fact, the public doesn't have access to them. Publicly traded companies filed on exchanges, they have quarterly reports, annual reports, time frames in which they have to report them and all that kind of stuff. So you lose freedom. It's funny, you have easier access to capital, but you lose freedom in how you run your company. So like anything else, there's a give and take, right? So.
Do you think that in some ways or many ways that someone an entrepreneurial venture or a minded or executive team is in some ways more an artist than an executor or an executive?
I can understand why you asked that question, without a doubt. I don't know how to answer it. I used to say that there's an art form to trading. Like trading is an art, right? You know? And you could say that to some extent. It's such a, man.
Take a goal. There's no right or wrong answers. It's just
no. I'm trying to bring one forth that makes sense. There's certainly a spirit to entrepreneurship, right? There's a spirit to being unique and different, and that's certainly an artist. trait as well. So it's a definitely a fair comparison. I mean, that the thing. Okay, actually, I could really go sideways with this. People, I am going to go sideways with this. I never understood artists and politics. All right, I've never understood artists and politics, because if you pay some attention to it, a lot of artists and their political leanings tend to be more socialist, all right, than they do, say, capitalist, all right? Or and to me, that's always struck me as so bizarre, because socialism is regulation. Socialism eliminates free will, or it's deterministic, etc. And that's the antithesis of what an artist practices, right? An artist is full-blown personal expression, whatever their medium, whether it's writing music, whether it's painting an oil painting, creating a movie, writing a book, right? On and on, right? Isn't that freedom? You don't want anybody to tell you how to do it, but yet they're so often socialist in their leanings. And the other thing about that is if that artist is so inclined to want to sell their wares, which of course some artists don't want to, because they perhaps view that as sacrilegious, but making money off of something you create. In any case, if an artist wants to sell their product, they're going to fetch a better price for themselves in a free market, right? At least that's the theory of free markets. If their product, if they're a better painter than their next door neighbor, they're going to get more money for their painting. So, entrepreneurship,
psychological?
Entrepreneurship could certainly be considered artistic,
Okay.
in the sense of differentiation. What were you saying about psychological?
That why would, and you're saying, why would those who are considered artists or in that realm tend to lean
the argument,
to a leftist or socialist side?
And having had these conversations with people in the past, the argument is, well, an artist benefits from socialism because they get to practice their art. They get to do they get to produce their art. Somebody else can feed them. Somebody else can go, harvest the wheat, right? And then you know what I mean? In a socialist economy, everybody's got their spot. Now, my argument would be, well, how do you know you're going to get to be an artist, right? Just because you paint better than that person does, the government might say, well, we don't have a need for plein air. You excel at plein air. We don't need you. So take this scythe and go out there and, that landscape you want to paint?
Follow it. I totally forget it.
So anyhow, and again, to me, freedom makes a lot of sense, as long as we aren't hurting each other in the practice of that freedom. But I know I also shared with you on the podcast that my views of objectivism and individualism have pretty much slipped right out the back door, and I now understand significantly subjectivism, which I should have appreciated more as a student of the Austrian School of Economics, but I also respect the community a lot more, and I understand the concept of brotherly love far different than I did before.
Brett, we'll conclude this week's The Drift
right.
Weekly.
Can we walk
Monday?
Can we walk this way? Because I got to get back. I'm sorry.
Let's do it. This is we're here with Britt Huycke, President and CFO of Smart Capital Inc., and Tom Dioro, yours truly. Thank you for listening.